Have you ever noticed how the quietest child in the room is often the one carrying the heaviest burden? The one who always sits politely, never interrupts, never asks for too much, and always follows the rules. On the surface, they seem like a parent's dream, a teacher's pride, the model of discipline and obedience. But beneath that calm exterior, there is often a silent ache, a hidden pain that rarely gets noticed because it hides behind smiles, nods, and the word, yes. And the truth is, what looks like perfect behavior in childhood often leaves behind scars that are difficult to explain. This is the story of the obedient child. Not just the child you might remember from your past, but the child that still lives in so many adults today. Every child is born with raw impulses, natural emotions, unfiltered desires. They want to cry when they feel hurt, laugh when they feel joy, run when they feel energy, and resist when something doesn't feel right. But what happens when a child quickly realizes that their laughter is too loud, their questions are too many, their tears are inconvenient, and their resistance is met with silence or disapproval? Because when a child learns to be too obedient, too accommodating, too good, they are often trading pieces of their authentic self for the approval of others. And the cost of that trade can last a lifetime. Think about it. Slowly, they learn to tame themselves. They learn to swap authenticity for acceptance. And that's where the hidden pain begins. Psychologists have long spoken about something called conditional love. It is the kind of love that feels available only when you behave in the right way. Many obedient children grow up in environments where they believe love and safety are dependent on compliance. They learn to read the room better than most adults, to anticipate what others need, and to adjust themselves accordingly. And while this may sound like maturity, what it often creates is a lifelong pattern of self-suppression. Here's the part that many people miss. Obedience in a child isn't always a sign of health. Sometimes it's a survival strategy, a way of ensuring that they won't be abandoned, rejected, or criticized. It's as if the child silently tells themselves, if I am good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, maybe then I'll be loved. Now pause for a moment and think about the adult version of this child. Maybe you know them. Maybe you are them. The adult who struggles to say no. The person who always takes on extra work even when exhausted. The friend who listens endlessly but rarely shares their own struggles. The partner who tries to avoid conflict at all costs. These are often the hidden faces of the once obedient child. But why is this so painful? Why does being good, being compliant carry such a heavy cost? The answer lies in something called authenticity loss. Human beings are wired for expression. We are meant to cry, to argue, to laugh, to play, to question. When those impulses are repeatedly suppressed, the self fragments. The outer self becomes polished, agreeable, and composed. The inner self becomes muted, silenced, sometimes even forgotten. And over time, that inner voice whispers less and less until the person doesn't quite know who they are outside of pleasing others. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever wondered why so many adults struggle with identity, purpose, or self-worth? Could it be that their earliest lessons weren't about discovering who they were, but about shaping themselves into who others needed them to be? That's the silent inheritance of the obedient child. And here's something fascinating. Research in developmental psychology shows that children who are excessively obedient often score lower on measures of self-esteem later in life. Why? Because they were never given the space to build an identity separate from compliance. They were rewarded for erasing parts of themselves, not for discovering them. But let's go deeper. Imagine a child who desperately wants to draw in bright colors, but is told to stay inside the lines. Imagine a child who wants to ask why the sky is blue but is silenced because the question is inconvenient. Imagine a child who wants to say, "I'm sad," but instead smiles because sadness is not welcomed. Over time, that child learns that self-expression is unsafe. And what's unsafe becomes buried. But buried feelings don't disappear. They transform. Sometimes into anxiety, sometimes into perfectionism, sometimes into a deep sense of emptiness that even achievements cannot fill. This is the paradox of obedience. Society praises it, parents showcase it, Teachers reward it. But rarely do we pause to ask, what did that child have to sacrifice to be so good? Now let's open a curiosity loop here, because the obedient child grows up believing that their worth is tied to performance, to helpfulness, to harmony. But what happens when the adult version of this child finally encounters a moment where obedience is no longer enough? What happens when they follow all the rules at work, but still get overlooked? When they give endlessly in relationships, but still feel unloved? When they remain quiet in friendships, but still feel invisible? That's when the hidden pain surfaces. That's when the cracks begin to show. See, the story of the obedient child is not about childhood alone. It is about how early patterns echo through adulthood. It is about how silence turns into people-pleasing, how compliance turns into burnout, and how the quest for approval turns into a lifelong battle with self-worth. And yet, here's the most striking part. Many obedient children don't even realize the weight they're carrying, because to them, obedience is not a choice. It's an identity. It feels natural, automatic. They don't even recognize how much of themselves they've lost along the way. But let's not mistake this for hopelessness, because within the hidden pain lies a hidden strength. The obedient child learns empathy, sensitivity, awareness. They can read emotions. They can hold space. They can bring harmony into chaos. These are powerful gifts. But the challenge is this: will those gifts always come at the cost of their own soul? Or can they learn to balance obedience with authenticity, kindness with boundaries, harmony with truth? The obedient child's journey is ultimately about reclaiming voice, about rediscovering that their value doesn't depend on constant compliance, but on their inherent worth as a human being. And this realization is not just healing. It is revolutionary, because when an obedient child finally learns to speak their truth, they don't just free themselves, they free generations that come after them. But here's where we go even deeper. Why does society reward obedience so heavily in the first place? Why do we smile at the quiet child and frown at the loud one? Why do we prize the easy student and label the spirited one as difficult? Could it be that we as a culture are more comfortable with compliance than with authenticity? That we would rather raise children who fit neatly into systems than children who challenge and disrupt? And if that's the case, then maybe the pain of the obedient child isn't just personal. Maybe it's cultural. Maybe it's the echo of a society that values order more than individuality, performance more than presence, silence more than voice. I want to leave you with this question for now, and we'll return to it in the next part. What happens to a world full of adults who were once obedient children? Adults who know how to conform, how to please, how to hide, but who never truly learned how to be. So let's return to that question. What happens to a world full of adults who were once obedient children? Adults who learned early on that being good meant being quiet, that pleasing others was safer than being true to themselves, and that love was something earned rather than something freely given. The answer is all around us. It shows up in workplaces where people silently endure jobs that drain them, too afraid to speak up or step away. It shows up in relationships where one partner gives and gives, hoping their sacrifices will finally be enough to secure love while their own needs remain invisible. It shows up in friendships where someone always listens but rarely feels heard, always comforts but rarely receives comfort. At first glance, these adults seem dependable, reliable, and selfless. But if you look closer, you'll notice the weariness in their eyes, the quiet resentment that builds silently, the longing to finally be seen, not just for what they do, but for who they are. And here's the truth. This hidden pain often goes unnoticed because obedient adults rarely make noise. They rarely demand. They rarely disrupt. But inside, they carry a silent fatigue, the exhaustion of living a life that feels more like performance than authenticity. Now let's pause and look at this through psychology. Research in developmental psychology and attachment theory shows us that children who adapt too much to the needs of their environment often develop what's called a false self. The false self is like a mask. It is polished, agreeable, and acceptable to others, but it hides the authentic self underneath. Over time, this false self becomes so practiced that the person almost forgets who they truly are. But the authentic self doesn't disappear. It waits, often in silence, for moments of expression. Sometimes it breaks through in unexpected ways, in art, in sudden bursts of emotion, in quiet rebellion. Sometimes it waits for years until adulthood offers enough safety to finally risk being real. And this raises a profound question. How do you rediscover your authentic self after years, maybe decades of obedience? The first step is awareness. To recognize that what feels like natural compliance might actually be conditioning. To notice the moments when you say yes while your heart is screaming no. To notice the tension between what you show the world and what you feel inside. This awareness is not easy because it often brings grief. Grief for the childhood where your feelings were muted. Grief for the relationships where you never felt fully yourself. Grief for the years spent living as a shadow of who you might have been. But grief, as painful as it is also cleansing. It creates space for something new. The second step is permission. Giving yourself permission to exist outside of others' expectations. Permission to rest even when there's work to do. Permission to say no even when someone else wants a yes. Permission to express feelings that are messy, inconvenient, or vulnerable. This permission is the beginning of reclaiming the self that obedience once buried. And then comes courage. Because choosing authenticity is not always easy. Sometimes it disappoints people. Sometimes it creates conflict. Sometimes it challenges systems that depend on compliance. But here's the paradox. Only through that courage can you discover relationships, careers, and communities that love you not for your obedience, but for your truth. But let's step back for a moment. Why is this conversation important for all of us? Even if you don't see yourself as an obedient child, because society is built on the backs of obedient adults. Our systems, schools, workplaces, even families often rely on people who quietly follow, who adjust, who suppress. And yet, the greatest innovations, the most profound art, the most meaningful social change has always come from those who dare to break out of obedience. This is why the hidden pain of the obedient child matters. Because if we do not see it, if we do not name it, we risk raising generation after generation of adults who can function, who can comply, but who never truly live. And here's where hope enters. The obedient child is not doomed to remain hidden forever. Many adults who once carried this silent pain eventually begin to awaken. Sometimes it happens in therapy, sometimes through a supportive friend or partner, sometimes through art, writing, or spiritual exploration. And sometimes it begins with something as simple as asking yourself, what do I really want? What do I really feel? What would I do if I stopped trying to be good and started trying to be real? These questions can feel terrifying at first, but they are also liberating. They begin to peel away the layers of obedience to reveal a self that has been waiting patiently underneath. Let me share a thought experiment. Imagine a child who never had to earn love by being obedient. Imagine a child who could express sadness without fear, joy without shame, anger without rejection. What kind of adult would they become? Likely someone with a strong sense of self, someone able to balance kindness with boundaries, someone unafraid to challenge and create. Now imagine if we as adults could give that kind of space to ourselves to reparent the obedient child within us to whisper, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to always say yes. You are worthy simply because you exist. This shift is not just personal, it is cultural. Because every time one obedient child turned adult chooses authenticity, they give permission for others to do the same. They model a new way of being, one where love is not earned through compliance but shared through truth. And maybe this is the hidden gift inside the hidden pain, that those who know the cost of obedience also know the value of freedom. That those who once silenced themselves can one day become the fiercest advocates for voice. Not only for themselves, but for others. But let us be unequivocally clear and speak with unflinching honesty about the monumental nature of this undertaking. Let's not pretend for a single moment that this is easy. The path of unraveling a lifetime of ingrained obedience is not a gentle stroll. It is a profound and often disorienting upheaval of the very foundations upon which you have built your sense of safety and worth. Breaking these deep-seated, often subconscious patterns can feel in your very bones, like a profound and terrifying act of betrayal. It can feel like a betrayal of the explicit and implicit expectations handed down by your family, a rejection of the blueprint they provided for how to be a good son or daughter. It can feel like a betrayal of the cultural norms and traditions that have shaped your community, making you feel like an outsider in your own homeland. Most insidiously, it can feel like a betrayal of the very beliefs you have internalized about yourself. The belief that your value is contingent on your compliance, that love is a transaction for good behavior, and that rocking the boat is the greatest sin of all. This feeling of betrayal is a heavy, gut-wrenching weight, and to dismiss it would be to dishonor the courage it takes to even consider this path. However, you must hold on to this crucial truth with both hands. What feels like betrayal at the very beginning of this journey, in the raw and vulnerable first stages, often, with time, perspective, and healing, reveals its true nature. It unveils itself not as treachery, but as the most profound liberation you will ever know. It is the liberation of your soul from a cage you did not even know you were in. Because the greatest loyalty we can ever offer, the most profound fidelity we can practice, is not a blind allegiance to the masks we were taught to wear to please others, to fit in, or to avoid conflict. The ultimate loyalty is a fierce and unwavering commitment to the raw, imperfect, beautiful, and unique truth of who we are at our very core, beneath all the conditioning and performance. So, let me leave you with this thought, and I urge you to let it settle deep within you. If you were once that obedient child, the one who learned to be seen and not heard, to prioritize comfort over authenticity, please know that your pain is real. It is valid. It is not an illusion or a sign of weakness. It is the echo of a self that was asked to shrink, and its ache is testament to your spirit's unyielding desire to expand. But hear this, and hear it well. That pain is not the end of your story. It is a pivotal chapter, perhaps, but it is not the conclusion. Beneath the heavy cloak of obedience you have worn for so long, there lies not weakness, but a profound and powerful humanity. A deep well of sensitivity that allows you to feel the world in high definition, a boundless capacity for empathy that connects you to the hearts of others, and a resilient, forged-in-fire strength that has allowed you to endure this long. Beneath the silence you were conditioned to maintain, there does not lie nothingness. There lies a voice, your voice, that is unique, valuable, and deserves to be heard, to contribute its singular note to the chorus of the world. And beneath the hidden pain, buried under layers of duty and expectation, there does not lie an empty void. There lies the dazzling, fertile possibility of a new beginning. A beginning where your worth is no longer a variable tied to the fluctuating metric of how well you obey, how little you trouble others, or how perfectly you perform. It is a new dawn where your worth is an immutable, non-negotiable fact of your existence, and your life's purpose shifts from how well I can follow to how fully, boldly, and authentically I can live. And if you are in the position of raising or mentoring children in this very moment, hold on to this truth with all your might. Let it be the compass that guides your every interaction. The ultimate goal, the most profound success you can achieve, is not to cultivate perfect obedience. It is not to shape a child who remains perpetually silent, who never dares to argue a point, who never questions an authority, who never ever resists an instruction that feels wrong in their spirit. That path, though seemingly smooth and convenient, is one that leads to a hidden inner wilderness. The true and noble goal, the one that builds resilient and whole human beings, is to foster an environment, a sanctuary of unconditional acceptance, where a child feels profoundly and utterly safe enough to be fully, unapologetically themselves. This means creating a space where their big, messy emotions are met with curiosity rather than condemnation, where their endless whys are met with engagement rather than exasperation, and where their attempts to push boundaries are seen not as defiance, but as the necessary, healthy development of a will and a voice of their own. Because that child, the one who has been given the priceless gift of psychological safety, will not grow into an adult burdened by the hidden pain of a suppressed self. They will not have to spend decades of their life in a therapist's office untangling the knots of compliance or trying to unearth an identity they were never allowed to build. Instead, they will mature into an adult who carries within them the radiant, unquenchable light of authenticity into a world that is so often dimmed by pretense and performance. They will walk through life with a core of self-knowledge that cannot be shaken, capable of forming genuine relationships, pursuing true callings, and standing up for their beliefs because they have never been taught to sit down on their own soul. The obedient child, the one we began this journey with, may have been quiet, their voice a whisper in the grand noise of the world, but their story is not a quiet one. Their story is not over. Their story is, in fact, the collective, unfolding narrative of countless adults who are now, slowly and courageously, learning to step out of the long shadows cast by their past. It is a story of brave souls doing the painstaking work of peeling away the layers of conditioning, of quieting the internal critic that sounds like a childhood authority, and of finally, tentatively, stepping into the brilliant and daunting fullness of who they were always meant to be. And perhaps, when we distill all of this down, that is the single most important lesson of all, that true goodness, the kind that matters and endures, is not found in the sterile, cold halls of obedience, but in the warm, vibrant, and sometimes chaotic garden of authenticity. That true love, the kind that heals and empowers, is not a prize to be earned through good behavior or flawless performance, but is a gift to be given freely and received unconditionally. And that the most obedient child, the one who learned to hide so well, can one day, with immense bravery, profound self-compassion, and unwavering determination, become the most authentic adult, if they are only brave enough to embark on the greatest adventure of all, the journey to reclaim themselves.